Welcome to the Strength Connection podcast, a show to share stories, insights, and experiences from some of the greatest coaches in the world. I'm Michael Kurkowski, so grateful for you joining me today. And if you like this episode, please like, share, and subscribe to support the show. All right, let's dive in. Here we go. All right, and we are live, again. What's up, Dr. Kathy Dooley? How are you?
Hi, sorry about the tech issue.
Oh, no worries. It's the world that we live in of Zoom. But yeah, we had a quick technical difficulty, so we're going to start this again. But again, so grateful to have you on. As I was mentioning before, I'll say the same corny joke. Your ears had to be ringing about a month ago because your praises were being sung when I was doing a roundtable podcast with some good friends, DJ, Mark, and Brett. So really grateful to have you on and to dive into a lot of fun stuff today.
Well, it's always nice to be in that kind of conversation with such incredible people. I look up to them so much and consider them to be just wonderful people. So I'm honored and privileged to be here.
Yeah, no doubt. So, I mean, anytime I bring somebody on, I'm always, fascinated with people's journeys and, the work that they do specifically in coaching and being a practitioner and just going through everything that you've done from early on into now as like your resume is just, it's way too long to go over everything. So we're not going to dive in. We'll go as we roll. But if you could just for everybody maybe who doesn't know what you do, just give a brief just description of who you are, what you practice now, and kind of like the day-by-day people of who you serve.
Absolutely. So I am a chiropractor both in New York and Colorado, although I mostly practice in person in Colorado or in New York and then via telehealth in Colorado. I am a chiropractor. I'm a rehabilitative type. If you think of like Craig Liebenson, that's the type of chiropractor I am and always have been. I spend 45 minutes with my patients and we do a lot of rehabilitative work. I am also a functional medicine specialist and acupuncturist. And so there's a lot of that going on, a lot of multidisciplinary things happening. I'm obsessed with the kettlebell. We have about 20 kettlebells in our small little Manhattan office. And of course, I have the various array, Strong First certified in everything that they have to offer currently. Hopefully, they'll offer more in the future.
Yep.
And that's how I met the amazing Brett Jones. And I love using the kettlebell for rehabilitative purposes to build people back into to using strength to help with rehabilitation. As Charlie Weingroff would probably say, rehab equals training, training equals rehab. And I do agree with Charlie on that. And so my Gen Pop is mostly what I see, although I do work for a couple of collegiate sports teams to help them with rehabilitation strategies, which is a great honor and privilege.
Nice. Yeah. So we're going to get into the kettlebell work a lot down the line because I want to know more about, it's a great tool for strength and preventative care, but as a rehab tool, I know I did CKFMS a million years ago, which was still one of my favorite events that I ever went to.
Mine too.
Gray and Brett, I crack up with Brett all the time on that. Like I'm still recovering mentally from that 4-day weekend because there was so much information and so much great stuff of going into. But to go into your journey, Kathy, a bit, you said like this wasn't always what you were really interested in. What led you down the path of wanting to get into clinical care, into medicine, ultimately combining that with movement and the preventative side as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have a theater background, so I was doing that in my early days in college. I was a double major in both biology. So I was always kind of good at science, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a healthcare practitioner. In fact, if I could talk to my, teenage self now, she would be laughing if she found out the path that I ended up on, which is so fascinating because I was very much into art and artistic expression and it's not that strange for people to have like a science and an art background. And the more I've learned about medicine, the more I learned it's an art in and of itself. So I would say that I found theater to be unfulfilling to me personally and professionally. So I started, using more of my bio background and I was studying nutrition and I started to have panic attacks for reasons we still don't quite know. And they were, for people, any listeners that have had those, it's kind of like stigmatized and less so today than it was, if you remember, like 20
Yeah.
years ago. If you've been alive that long, it was highly, highly stigmatized. And I remember going to a physician and asking about why I was having it, and they couldn't give me any answers. And I was, nerd. So I was
Sure.
like not satisfied with that. The internet was still relatively new. I was 21. So this is, 24 years ago. And I was like, this is not satisfying. So I started doing some of the dives into what causes anxiety. And I was like, this is really, really frustrating that there's not any more information on this.
Mhm.
And I was working at a general nutrition center. If you guys remember, GNC was like
Oh yeah.
the heyday where everyone got their creatine and their protein powder and their BCAAs. And so someone had come into the store and said, you should try a chiropractor. And I was like, my back doesn't hurt. Why would
Right.
I go to a chiropractor? And they were like, no, 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 it's the nervous system is affected by spinal position. And this is just a patient. This wasn't even a doctor that was telling me this. It was just, someone that had been to a chiropractor and they had helped a lot. And I was like, well, I'll try anything because I was being pushed, like medication was being pushed at me, like lorazepam, things that are still used,
Hmm.
anxiolytics. No judgment against those, but I was more like, I want to understand why I'm having it and not just cover it up.
Mm.
And it turns out that I knew I had a history of multiple concussions and multiple car accidents. And she said, the chiropractor, a brilliant chiropractor, she said, I had a really bad spinal position, like reverse lordosis, where your head's kind of forward, your
Hmm.
neck is lost its curve. And then it was stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. And it turns out she's absolutely correct about all of that and anatomically. And so I started to get adjusted by her. And it was so effective that I started to work for her.
Wow.
And as I started to work for her, I was like, I think I'm going to change, from studying just nutrition to being a chiropractor, which is a very autonomous profession where we can, advise about nutrition,
Hmm.
acupuncture, chiropractic, and we're very holistic practitioners. And so I was like, well, that she was very inspiring. And so I was like, okay. So I went and here we are. And that's how I became a chiropractor and a
Wow.
non-traditional type of chiropractor too, which is
Right. I want to ask you about that too. That's interesting. Did you feel the relief right away of getting into treatment with
I
chiropractor?
I was having panic attacks for a month straight every single day. And it would be, somewhere between 8 and 10 hours a day. My entire body would be tremoring.
Hmm.
And it was really a lot of people, like very well-meaning people that were important to me, had wanted me to take the medication. They were like,
Yeah.
just take the medication. And there's something in me saying, not yet, like investigate. I was miserable. If you could imagine a month of just tremoring and not having a really good explanation for it.
Yeah.
And so much judgment around anxiety. And I'm like, well, I don't feel what people describe as anxious, but my body looks certainly anxious.
Right.
And I can't sleep. I can't, think. And it was really, really frustrating. So I would say about three adjustments in. So she adjusted me on a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And after that, I had about 70% depletion of symptomatology. And
Wow.
after a month of being pretty miserable, I was like, I don't understand how this works. And she was describing to me about norepinephrine and epinephrine and how
Hmm.
it was released from the sympathetic chain. Sympathetic chain is sitting on cervical transverse processes, and the more we aligned it, the less irritation of the sympathetic nervous system. So my body was not in fight or flight; it wasn't in stress, and that made the total sense to me, and that also sparked my interest in human anatomy.
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting that just the difference, the body keeps the score, right? And the body speaks to us more often than the mind does. And as someone, I've been down that road before of anxiety attack and panic attack. I've, had it from, early on, but a lot in my late 20s, even when I was doing quote unquote all the right things,
Right.
of, nutrition and health and like all things were going really good, but still there was this existential thing that was going on. And there is kind of there maybe it's less so now. I think it's more talked about now, but there
Mhm.
was the stigma to this of almost just snap, Cher and Moonstruck, the snap out of it,
Snap
type
out of it.
mentality.
Get it
Exactly. Of
together.
just like you can just get this in, but your body's telling you something when it's going into something like that. And it might not be something that needs so much work on it. It might just needs just some realignment and some
Mhm.
readjustment of getting in. So you felt that firsthand. So then when you went into chiropractics, you found more of a path and something that was calling you more to the rehabilitative side. What's the difference between rehabilitative chiropractics and I guess more traditional chiropractics?
I guess people would compare a chiropractor to what they now know as a physical therapist. You have to remember too, 25 years ago, physical therapists were not doing adjusting. They were not doing even a whole lot of hands-on therapy. They were doing mostly rehabilitative strategy, like
Mhm.
exercise strategy. And even when I was in school, that was when PTs were starting to get their grade 5 MOB, and PTs were like Greg Cook, you had mentioned, it was an MPT, and now it's doctorate. So it's
Mhm.
now they're able to do grade 5 MOBs, they're able to do just have a little bit more autonomy in what they can do as far as body work. So I would say that chiropractic rehab specialist is very similar to what people can like a DPT, only we give a lot more advice about nutrition. We give a lot more total holistic advice, and we don't need a referral from an MD.
Gotcha. Okay. That's
It's very
interesting.
similar. I think that's why I get along with physical therapists so well, and why a lot of them end up in my courses, and why we can converse very freely because it's we work very similarly.
Yeah. It seems industries though, like yeah, I've known a lot of physical therapists, and it's a very tough industry for a lot of them because they're almost handcuffed in a lot of things from an insurance side, where it
Mhm.
seems like maybe the chiropractic, I'm sure you can go down a whole diatribe on that difference right
Well,
there.
Mike, I wouldn't be able to tell you because the insurance system is so frustrating. I can only
Yeah.
speak for us in the US. For people that are your international listeners, and I'm sure it's different, but or maybe it's not, I don't know.
Mhm.
But I am an out-of-network chiropractor, so I don't deal with insurance at
Yeah.
all. I mean, I will give a bill sheet to a patient if they want to try to submit, but I don't
Yeah.
participate.
Yeah.
I refuse to participate and be boxed in. And I do think that you're right that physical therapists, in order to be successful, especially if they're working in a hospital setting or if they're working with a referral-based system,
Mhm.
then they are very dependent upon, I have this amount of visits, but I am my own business owner and I
Yeah.
don't believe in that kind of system. And I will help you to try to get your reimbursement if you need to, but it stops there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be bound and hog-tied
Yeah.
to what an insurance company that has nothing, that has no knowledge of rehabilitation, really has no idea what we're doing, and is not in the room with me. Am I going to be tied down to what they think that I should do?
Yeah, no, everybody that I know who's really aiming up in wanting to really make an impact in their world in physical therapy or practitioner, they eventually get to that road where it's like, I'm just
Mhm.
not dealing with this because you, like, as you said, there's so much more than just getting somebody on and probably adjusting their spine. Like, there's what's the lifestyle habits and stuff. So going into that with the nutrition work, like preventative care, more like strength and stuff. Was that something that you learned a lot when you were in school, or was that
Mhm.
something that was always more of kind of like a passion to you of knowing that this is all part of the whole process that I wanted to work with people on?
We know that as chiropractors that we are autonomous and we are responsible for nutrition. And although we do have diplomates in nutrition for chiropractic, where you can do advanced studies, we are exposed to nutrition quite a bit more than the average
Mhm.
therapeutic intervention. I had amazing nutrition instructors in school, and I did take advanced nutrition courses. And then, of course, I did, continuing ed in that, and continuing to do more
Mhm.
continuing ed in that. But I do think it's a very personal passion of mine. Like if someone has, like, hey, you can't out train a bad diet.
Right.
That mentality that a lot of trainers, they're right. I love the memes that are on Instagram where you see the 40-year-old guy trying to out train the guy, the Ronald McDonald guy in the
Yeah.
costume running after. It's hilarious, and I'm like, that's exactly right. The more the older you get, the more you start to become wiser and understand that, what you put in is
Mhm.
just as important as the actual training process itself. So there's a limitation in just giving people rehabilitative strategy, or just giving them an adjustment, or just giving them ART, or just giving them acupuncture. If they weren't going to change some of their lifestyle habits, then we were
Mhm.
always going to be fighting a losing battle.
Yeah. Now, I'm just an interesting question. How receptive are people when you talk about those things? Like mostly people when they're coming to you, they're in pain, like they're looking to get a something, they're getting out of pain. They want an immediate response on it. And when you start talking about lifestyle aspects and preventative care, it can be a very different conversation. In your experience, how receptive are people of listening to those things in your field? Because I see it on the coaching side a lot where
Mhm.
people kind of understand it's a little bit more of a journey, so maybe they're a little bit more open to it. I was always curious more on your end, which more the preventative care and the clinical side, how people take that information.
It's a great question. I think that they are quite receptive by the time they get to me, because by the time they get to me, they have failed a lot of things.
Yeah. Hmm.
And on the clinical side, I very rarely get someone at the beginning of their journey. It's if you're willing to pay a high price point for a midtown chiropractor that is not going to necessarily bill your insurance, you probably have tried quite a few things and failed.
Hmm.
So if you have an expert in front of you that's saying, let me suggest this, and this to you, I'm not concerned about whether or not they follow through in that moment. I'm
Right.
more concerned that they receive the education that they need in that moment. Doctor means teacher, not fix your stuff.
Mm.
And so I really do want them to, I want to meet them where they're at. So I will expose them. And as their interest grows or as I see their dedication grows, then I will make that relationship a little bit more developed in that particular discipline. Like if I have a person that says, I'm not changing my diet no matter what, Dooley, it's not happening, then I can't keep shoving diet down their throat.
Yes.
And like I'm just like, okay, well, let me do what I can to optimize these other features. And so I would say it's a mixture of things. I
Mhm.
think that by the time most people see my knowledge base with supplements, with nutrition, and how I'm able to debunk certain things that has been cranked into them, like creatine being bad for your kidneys or something stupid like that. I can you usually get them to buy in through knowledge and through education. And if I can, I can't. I don't lose sleep about it.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go into nutrition and supplementation a little bit, but first I want to ask a little more about your strength work. You've been in the RKC, like so way back in the day, and then went into Strong First and SFG. What inspired you to go into that realm in strength? Like, was there something about the kettlebell or that system of
Mhm.
strength that really seemed like it appealed to you?
Yeah. I will blame my amazing friend Matt Tolstoy, who was a trainer at Equinox.
Okay.
And I was an educator for Equinox at the time. I would come in and do just small talks. I wasn't a big deal or anything. I was just really fascinated with trainers. I loved what they did. They got to watch their clients an hour a day, multiple times a week. I thought what they did really, really mattered. And I wanted to have an influence on that clinically and help them to understand the clinical side. So I met Matt that way. And he is this incredible person. He's now a doctor of acupuncture and Oriental medicine. He's a brilliant guy. But he and I started to do some training together. I was always interested in training because I knew the limitations of manual therapy on myself.
Okay.
That it would just be like, why is this tight even though I just had a massage? Or why do I feel like I get acupuncture and it doesn't hold, or a chiropractic adjustment doesn't hold? And so, as someone with a connective tissue issue, like I had this non-specific connective tissue issue where I can bend things a little too far. It's not EDS, it's not one of the more serious kind of connective tissue disorders, but it's this generalized connective tissue issue. And I knew that I responded better to strength, but I had to do it in a way that was safe, where my body didn't
Mhm.
reject it. When Matt introduced me to the kettlebell, I started to see the versatility of it, that it was, balancing rather than a traditional dumbbell where the weights are out to the side and creating more instability for the patient. It was a centralized weight where I could
Mhm.
put it over my center of mass or manipulate my body around it. And that made more sense to me. Then,
Mhm.
and I didn't start with ballistics. I had to start with things that were grinds and things that were stabilizing. And then
Okay.
once I was stable, starting to add in more and more ballistics that where my body would be ripped into a million different directions
Mhm.
where it could be very, very stable. And I was addicted very early. I would say that
Mm.
was 2011 to 2012. I did the RKC in 2012. So it was Matt. Matt was my influence. It was an amazing trainer. Trainers have been a huge influence to me in my life. So I have a massive respect for what they do and the limitations that they have to deal with. I want to help them with because they're
Mhm.
in New York City, they're not allowed to touch, right?
Right.
They don't have palpation as an ability. So I had to, create even my own systems of assessment that I could share with them so that if they couldn't touch, how could they help someone in front of them? Because they helped me so much, I wanted to give back.
Yeah. Oh, shout out to Matt. That's awesome. That's a
Oh,
great
he's
everybody.
the best person, the world's best person. Hi, Matt.
Yeah. So you said kind of like that immediate hook and kind of working with grinds, like so I'm guessing like squats, presses, probably like
Mhm.
get-ups and stuff like that from there.
Mhm.
What was that hook like? Did you feel an immediate change in like the dynamics of your own movement, or was it more of a strength increase that you found? Like what was it that really, called to you, not just like on I could definitely use this and this is a great tool, but you felt it yourself. What was that kind of feeling that you had that ultimately realized like, yeah, this is definitely a tool that is great and I can use.
Mhm. Great question. I think the big focus came not first with building this strength mass. Because for me, as someone with a connective tissue issue and body pains, chronic pain all
Mm,
over, it wasn't like, oh, I want to be stronger. That's the solution. No, because when we do strong people stuff, we would get hurt a lot faster and easier. So for me, it was more like, how can I learn how to move through my life without pain?
uh,
So pain was my goal, like just chronic kind of pain somewhere, always somewhere, everywhere. And that's the life of people with connective tissue issues. They're actually, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself and for patients who've reported to me with empirical data. They're just afraid of it. They're afraid of the weight because they associate it with being hurt. And I didn't want that kind of vulnerability
mm,
to limit me. And also, I wanted to feel good. And so I started to notice, first doing calisthenics and then doing small things with people like Matt that I was like, oh, this is a really versatile tool and this is something I can control and it's small and then once I got control of it, we would create an overload principle.
Mhm.
And then that bell started to get really big and I saw myself doing things like a 32-kilo get up and I'm like, I never thought in a million years I'd be able to do a bicep curl without discomfort. And now I'm doing like these things that I could never see myself doing, deadlifting
Yeah.
like at one point, twice my body weight. Like how is that possible? I remember doing the strong first powerlifting or barbell
Mhm.
and feeling so confident, with incredible instructors like Marshall Roy. I remember him very specifically
Mhm.
being there with helping us with bench and just amazing people like Mike Hartle. Dr. Mike Hartle
Yeah.
was teaching and they were giving me all these cues and I remember leaving that course feeling fantastic. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I never saw myself doing military presses or
Mhm.
bench pressing or deadlifting for crying out loud, front squatting, back squatting. This is crazy. Like, and and it came from me first creating a very stable place with a kettlebell and then growing into more confidence with things like barbell.
Yeah, that's great. I got a chance to work with Doc Hartle a few weeks ago in a
Awesome.
workshop. He's one of my favorite people, and actually,
Oh,
he reminded me of one of the phrases that they use in the system where strength should give you more than it takes out of you in every workout, and I think that's what you really explained right there. And I think there still is this stigma of strength and conditioning training that you need to be this bloody mess afterwards and just tired and just get out. It's like, no, you should be like depositing money into the bank every time that you go in, and you should feel really good afterwards. So
Mhm.
if you're following a good system, you should be feeling better walking out of the gym than you were, leaving. Maybe you're a little sore, maybe you're a little tired because you just, put some fatigue, on your body, but it should be fueling you up rather than just depleting you down. And it seems like that's exactly what you got from
Yeah, I
that.
think one of my original kettlebell coaches, Steve Hollander, Coach Fury.
Love
He,
Steve. Mhm.
oh my God, he's the best.
Yeah.
He told me once when I was working towards a 20-kilo press, right? And I was preparing for Strong First 2, right? So he was telling me, you need to invigorate, not annihilate.
Oh,
And I was like, he could
love
just
that.
say things in like 2 words or 4 words. And
That's
I was like,
amazing.
and I would play it over like a mantra in my head, invigorate, not annihilate, invigorate, not annihilate. And he was really, really right. Like I think it was Dave Whitley who once told me, like, I could throw you down a staircase and you'd be sore. I could put you outside on a hot day and you would sweat. It doesn't necessarily mean you did anything productive.
Right.
And he's right. Like I was surrounded by these incredible coaches. I've surrounded myself with these
Mhm.
incredible coaches, and they would tell me these things, and I'm like, God, that is completely different than the way that I thought that
Mhm.
strength training would be. And
Yeah.
that's why I try to parlay into rehabilitation, that same mindset of like, this doesn't have to kill you for it to be productive. It's supposed to invigorate you. It's supposed to make you feel resilient.
That's a beautiful line. I love that. So, why was ballistics not really on the table for you at the beginning? Was that a self-choice or was it really not suited for
Mhm.
your body? So, if somebody has a connective tissue issue, is it better to really focus with like a grind-based
Yes.
program first versus ballistics?
100%. You'll see this if you have anybody that has Marfan's, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like any kind of connective tissue issue. They're super loosey-goosey. They have a high bite and score where they can like put their palms flat in the floor. They can
Right.
bring
And that hypermobility. Yeah.
that hypermobility or what Charlie Weingraf would call hypostability, right? Which I agree more with. Like these people can't find center. They have joint centration issues. So if you add ballistic speed volition to something when it's not centrated to begin with, the body will start to tighten and you'll start to put excessive weird forces on the body and that can result in easy injury.
Mhm.
So even though a kettlebell swing is extremely controlled, it's still ballistic, right?
Mhm.
And we've all seen people do kettlebell swings poorly
Yeah.
and you can look at that and you can see injury. Your first thought is injury. So for me, it was like, wait, maybe I should learn how to do a deadlift first.
Right.
And if a swing is a moving hinge with a ballistic component at the top, especially the Russian swing, maybe I should learn how to deadlift first. Do you know how many patients in my office had the hardest time with a hip hinge? I mean, a lot of them that had back problems, hamstring pulls, even, foot issues and knee issues. like they have such a hard time understanding what to do. I'm going to then put them into a kettlebell swing,
Mhm.
not, and when they can't deadlift, that doesn't make any sense. And so I do think, the basic push pull deadlift squat get up step up heavy carry, those major grinds are really important before you progress someone like myself, or maybe anyone,
Mhm.
into a ballistic situation.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, because a lot of what we teach first in strong first and work is the swing. Like, you do the deadlift and you kind of do the progressions
Mhm.
up.
Yeah.
But I remember I fell into, a pattern of mistake where, okay, somebody does a decent deadlift and then you immediately go right into a swing. It's like, well, they performed it once, but there really wasn't a biomarker or like really the stability in there. Like they could do it right and they could replicate, a rep or two. And I was like, okay, that's the goal. That's the green light that now we can go into swings where if they're very deconditioned or have an issue like this, you still might need to have some other biomarkers of stability before you go into ballistics. Were there some specific things that you had as like a biomarker of like, okay, now I feel stable enough or strong enough that now I can enter into the ballistic world of swings or snatches and stuff like
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an SFMA FMS practitioner, right? So, I mean, I owned a kettlebell gym for many years before the pandemic that was FMS system. And I was a clinician, I was an SFMA clinician. And for listeners who don't know what those things are, definitely look them up.
Mhm,
They're, Gray Cook and Brett Jones driven,
mhm,
and they know what they're talking about. But I wouldn't put somebody, through a swing if they had, an FMS active straight leg raise that was,
mhm,
one or below. I'm not going to encourage them to put the pressure into their back when they don't have a good hamstring position. And so I would use definitely those markers of my top tier, my sevens
mhm,
for SFMA and FMS, and make sure it was safe. I also, would put them through the sets of one, like Brett Jones suggests, like just
mhm.
work on the backswing or just work on placing the bell down. Because I think a jump from a deadlift into a swing is a kind of a big jump for some of my patients that are deconditioned, like you said, Mike, or people that have just never done ballistics
Right.
before. They're like, it's scary to me. It's a cannonball with a handle on it.
Yeah.
This is, intense. So I think it's really important to put people through. I really believe in progressions. I believe in starting small, making someone feel confident and building up. And I mean, I've put patients through phases of the get up, each phase of, those, big phases, I've made them stay on separate phases for a month
Yeah.
before I let them move on. 'Cause I'm like, I'm here to help you get well, not help you get hurt.
Right.
So I do think slow is smooth and smooth is fast. That military term is really important. And it's very hard for patients because they want what they want now, just like clients in personal training do, I'm
Yeah.
sure. Like but sometimes you just have to slow things down before you can speed them up. And the swing is a great example of that.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that of breaking down the getup. This was one of the biggest things that me and my former team, when we had our studio, would do is broke down the getups of working different stages. Before that, we always just like the getup is you learn all the steps and you go all the way up and then back
Yeah.
down. Versus we would start like, all right, you're doing 5 just to the elbow. All right, now we're working 3 just to the tall sit and
Yes.
then working. And then before somebody could go up in weight and try in a next weight, they need to be able to do a double with the weight underneath it. So it's like
Mhm.
that progression of it because it's very easy to do a shitty getup if you like, if you have the strength on it, where
Yeah.
you can start putting yourself in bad patterns. So that slow progression, and I challenge anybody, like do 5 get-ups to the elbow with a decent weight. It's going to be challenging by that fourth or
Yes.
fifth rep. Like it's not a regression by any means for
No, it's a humbling experience for the athlete to, some of the athletes that I work with that are rowers, like there's like Olympic level people, right? And then I'll tell them like the elbow prop phase of their get up is messy, right?
Mhm.
And that's a reason why when they turn in the boat, it's problematic. Do you notice that your get up's good to one side and not to the other? Well, that is diagnostic
Mhm.
as much as it is rehabilitative. So and having them work on that and is very, very humbling. They're like, oh my God, that is so challenging. Why is it so easy on this side and so not easy on the other?
Yeah.
They get it immediately. That's because they're starboard or like whatever. Like that's the reason why they're having an issue.
Mhm.
And I love that they get it almost immediately. Like, oh, why is that so easy to figure out? But I didn't do
Yeah.
it for myself. Well, because you're in it. You're in the, you can't be objective and objective,
100.
subjective and objective at the same time. It's really tough. So I love that you do that with your clients, that break it down. I think it's always shocking in a getup that we have to teach this to somebody because as kids, we didn't watch our parents. It's neurodevelopmental progressions that get up between the, 4 months to 12 months. It's
Mhm.
literally like the DNS posters are on my wall where I show the patient, here's the get up. You can see it right there, right there, right there, right there. They're like, oh my God, that's the Turkish get up. I'm like, yeah, that's the get up. And no one has to teach the kid how to do that. The kid's not mimicking their parents to create that. It's in their DNA.
Mhm.
So that's why the get up is one of my favorite exercises, because it should always be in someone's program, because it is how you learn to walk. It is how
Mhm.
you learn to transition through with the two limbs doing opposite things, two lower limbs doing opposite things. And not only is it diagnostic and a great warm up for people so they can see if anything's going to go wrong in their workout, it's also something you can load and make an exercise in and of itself that really helps people, the ultimate joint mobility and stability drill.
Yeah. I've heard Gray. I just had Gray on the podcast recently, and we were talking about that. Like, as babies, we do all this, like, we know how to do all this stuff. And then somewhere down the line, we screw it up and things roll from there. And
Cognition.
yeah.
When we get a choice in the matter, that's
Well,
where
I
it
heard,
screws up.
I heard you say something on a podcast about like kind of like move like a baby, but more like stabilize like a baby from there
Right.
rather than move. Can
Yeah,
you explain that a
people
little
give
bit?
me so much crap about teaching neurodevelopmental progressions. They're like, well,
Mhm.
I've had that people slam me and say, well, adults aren't babies. And I'm
Mhm.
like, that's such a small way to think about it.
Yeah.
Like you have that in your DNA and you're going to ignore it. Like
Mhm.
it's yes, you have different distributions. No, you don't need to ATG squat anymore because your head's not a third of your body weight and you're not trying to counterbalance
Right.
physically.
Yeah.
Yes, I get that. It doesn't mean you throw the squat out. So it's more like we need the adult to have the stabilization points that we had when we had no mimicry, when we had no compensatory strategy, when we just had no taxes, no bills, no
Mhm.
major emotional changes, when we had just had the ability to learn how to stabilize ourselves and centrate the joints.
Yeah.
That's what I want to return people to, is like there's a simplicity to it, and there's these rules, these laws
Mhm.
of just biomechanics, of just trying to get these things to center on their points without consequence. A baby does that really well, and they have almost no muscle. Like they're brown, fat blubber.
Right.
They're amazing. But as you watch the baby progress into toddler stage, they look jacked.
Yeah.
They look so strong. And if you've ever watched a toddler being chased by a parent at the airport, they can barely catch them, which is why they
Right.
always have their eyes on them because they're so fast. I mean, like, why is that kid so fast if his head's a fourth of his body weight at that point? Like, why are they not falling over? Because they're incredibly stable. So I think that instead of saying to ourselves, well, why would I do neurodevelopmental progressions if I'm an adult? Why wouldn't you?
Right.
Why wouldn't you? And what's fascinating is that when my patients are hurt, I deal with a lot of people in pain. When they hurt their backs, you know what they do? They do the get up. They to get
Mhm.
off and up and off the floor. They do exactly what I'm asking them to do, is share load between parts so that not one part's getting hit. And
Yeah.
that stability motor control and that ability to load share is a really important part of rehabilitation. And it's really quite fascinating that people will do it when they're reflexively when they're hurt.
Yeah, the word that kept coming to my mind as you're speaking is freedom. Like the
Mm,
freedom of movement. Like when a baby moves, they move so freely. And I know like
mhm,
when I'm really feeling lubed up in my joints and like really doing the right things, I just feel so free in my movements. I'm
mm.
not thinking about, oh, I need to stabilize here or I need to have mobility here. It's just naturally flowing in that state. And that's what you see as a child as we develop. They're just naturally flowing through their movement and they're stabilizing as they need. So we can definitely go back into that sense. Like it might take a little bit of time because we've screwed it up down the line, but yeah, that should be the goal of any rehabilitative or preventative care, is just to have that freedom of movement. But going into working with people with pain in there, I
Mhm.
know probably everybody's probably, it's an individual, there's an individualized probably approach to each person in some sense, but I'm sure there's some commonality as some systems that you do with each person. Like is there specific systems that you approach each person that's coming in with pain and kind of go through it? Is it an FMS? Is it other
Mm.
systems that you roll with? Kind of how's your approach to that?
I would say SFMA and DNS are probably the two core pieces of analytics that I use, getting
Okay.
people in ISO positions and getting them into movement positions and just
And
watching.
what is DNS again, please?
DNS is a dynamic neuromuscular stabilization.
Okay.
It's basically using neurodevelopmental programming. I like it. I wouldn't say it's my sole entity of things that I do, but I like it for, especially for creating isometric holds. Just trying to get somebody to learn to share all of their body parts together, like when you would free someone in a get up, like
Hmm.
hold this position, let me see what you do in this position.
Gotcha.
That's basically what they do in DNS. It's really quite interesting. And SFMA, of course, is top tier, just watching what someone does and see how they go through with it. FMS comes in, but if you're doing SFMA, you're essentially doing quite a bit of FMS,
Sure.
only it's just a little bit more. Those are my basics. And then I've come up with some things through, just observing over my 17 years of practicing, just breaking out the joint a little bit differently than SFMA does, just looking at things regionally and seeing where the hitches are. I would say I do a lot of movement analysis. I do palpation, obviously, because I'm a chiropractor and chiro
Mhm.
means hands. So
Yeah.
I of course, do that. But I mean, I can't do that with my telehealth patients.
Right. Yeah.
So palpation is like the icing on a cake, but it's not what bakes the cake. It's not the essential ingredients of the cake. So and I want to be able to teach what I do to people that can't touch. And a lot of that is my patients. I don't want them to be reliant on my
Mm.
touch for the sole diagnostic tool. So I think asking them where their perceptions of tightness are, asking them where their discomfort is, trying to get them to separate tightness from pain to help them understand the differences of those, because the description of pain is probably the biggest challenge of my career. Is like what I can't feel
What
what
is
they
that difference? What's the difference between tightness and pain?
huge. Tightness is proprioceptive. It's not nociceptive. So, Mike, you could say my hamstring's tight, or you could say my hamstring's painful. If I
Mhm.
come over to your hamstring and I can feel that it's tight objectively, but I can't feel your pain. So I try to get them to hone into feeling, do you feel a restriction of range of motion, or do you feel a pulling sensation, a yanking sensation?
Mhm.
Those are different than feeling nociception. I mean, how many times have you had somebody with lateral epicondylitis where they had like tennis elbow,
Mhm.
or even golfers up on the inside, like they have elbow discomfort, right, from a press. And I look at them and I palpate, I can't feel their pain and I can't feel excessive tightness. Now you can
Mm.
hammer and bang on their elbow, which a lot of them do. Like they just do that for weeks. But I actually find that their shoulder girdle, when they get past 90 degrees, is not actually moving fluidly, and they're trying to press it through with the elbow.
Mhm.
And that's why they feel the pain at the top of their press. And so, is the shoulder the problem or the elbow the problem? The elbow is the scapegoat. It's the thing that people are bullying through, and it's highly loaded with nociceptors. So, can a person develop an elbow problem or pain because they have a shoulder issue that's not even painful? And the answer is yes.
Mm.
Like a person can have a tight shoulder, an immobile shoulder. They don't have the range of motion to go overhead. So they're going to
Right.
push through another part. And you see this all the time in people that are in a snatch test. You see them as they get tired and their shoulder gets tired, they start to throw it up with their elbow.
Yep.
And then after SFG, they come to see me for their elbow pain. Like, oh, okay, I get it. And should we just hammer away at your elbow because it's functional painful, or should we look at your shoulder that is not necessarily painful, but it's certainly tight
Mm.
and doesn't move well. So I try to, open people's, it's a lot of my practice is opening people's minds to the side of the pain is not always the source of it. That's a Carol Levitt quote. That's not me. He was one of the originators of all of the things that we care about as far as manual therapy. But he really got me thinking, don't only look at where somebody hurts.
Right.
Look at the system. And I
Yeah.
think FMS is really good at that. And a lot of therapies that probably I don't even know about are good at that, looking at a global piece of the picture and not just beating down the nociceptors, just
Right.
hammering away. I mean, I think it's great that said if the foam roller hasn't fixed it by now, it probably never will. Like he's really right about that. How many people live on a lacrosse ball or a foam roller? And like you have to ask yourself, why is this always tight or why is this always painful? Maybe it's not the site of the only part of the problem.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about that in Brett's Mind the Gap workshop about using the foam roller. It's like you if you're spending more than like a couple minutes like on your whole body with the foam roller, it's like that's just that's just wasting time in there.
Well,
So
I don't want to say that to my patient because I don't want
yeah.
them to think any of their time is wasted. So
Right. Mhm.
I should have taken way more classes in psychology, and clearly I'm considering it because
Sure.
it's like kicking their puppy if I tell them that they can't foam roll. So I'll instead say maybe we need to target some of your foam rolling into a
Sure.
specific site, or maybe we need to do this patient specific warm up. But
Mhm.
they have if they have a strong enough feeling that that foam roller does something really, really positive, I can't immediately say, don't do it, it's stupid.
Yeah.
I more like have to say, maybe less time with that and more time with this total thing.
Hmm.
that's really you specific. And I'm going to write it down for you. I'm going to film it for you, and you're going to have it, and you can play it on your phone when you're in the gym, and maybe you'll look funny doing these weird things in the gym, but nobody's looking at you, trust me.
Right. It's interesting what you said about with the DNS of kind of holding those isolations in there. In that, are you looking for pain in the isolations? Because I was just thinking about it. I've had, from 20 years of lifting and stuff like that, you have various aches and tweaks and stuff. And some you kind of feel it in the more dynamic motion when you're actually moving versus some when you're feeling it more in that isolation from there. Are we kind of like, I guess like the question is there like a big difference when we're looking at that? Is like if something's like painful during movement versus something that's painful during an isolation of a hold?
Sure, I think those are, those are similar beasts.
Hmm.
If one is, of course, isometric, one's isokinetic. So isokinesis definitely makes things more complicated because now all of a sudden you're not trying to get this centrated, stacked position that doesn't move. Now you're trying to have all that and then move. So I think isokinetics are definitely more complicated, which is why I start with isometrics. I
Right.
start with that. And can you hold this position? And can you tell me if there's any discomfort? Now let's transition into the next position. So that's isokinetic. And then let's hold the next phase of the get up. Is this
Mhm.
uncomfortable? And then looking how things line up and how I call it load sharing.
Okay.
My patients can get that. They've never heard probably that before, but in some iteration they have. Like, I need to see how you share load between your shoulder, elbow, and wrist. Is your wrist painful because you don't actually have a good position of the shoulder girdle over it? Or are you just letting all your weight go into your wrist? Are you creating wrist impingement over and over with your push-up because you don't have good position? And so I'll have them hold an isometric bottom or an isometric top of a push-up, and then have them do the isokinetic portion just to see, is it coming apart in the iso holds or is it coming apart in the kinetic pieces?
Mhm.
And that actually is extremely diagnostic. I'm sure trainers do that as well. They're like, is it happening when they're moving or is it happening when they're static?
Right. Mhm. Yeah. Is there a specific time frame that you look at for holds for like people to determine, is it kind of I'm looking at it really quick, or does things change? I mean, obviously things change as you fatigue down if you're holding a position for a
Sure.
while. Like, is there a standard that you use of like
Hmm.
having somebody hold on that?
Yeah, I mean, typically 3 to 5 second ISO
Okay.
hold is what I want to see because I don't want, like you said, like the fatigue, the CNS burnout to be affecting my data.
Mhm.
So, like, what do they say? Like most ISO holds for tendon joint centration need to be somewhere around 5 seconds. So it's like, okay, well, if I can have them hold the top of the push-up for 5 seconds, then now descend to the bottom of the push-up for 5 seconds. I'm going to analyze that. Now I'm going to
Mm.
look at the kinetic portion of it. So just breaking it down into pieces. I know that makes things probably more challenging in the beginning because you're looking at so much, but it's the only way to make things easy is to hold it static, look and see what happens, and then make it kinetic.
Yeah. No,
See
that's
how it
really
goes
powerful.
together.
Yeah. Okay. I want to jump to some of the NKT work that you do. I know I'm
Mhm.
jumping around a little bit. I'm trying to
No, it's okay.
maximize our time that we got, and we're gonna have to have
Yeah.
you come back on so we can keep this rolling.
Oh, that's nice.
Neurokinetic training, what is this?
So remember how I said that if I have somebody use a foam roller, I want them to do it more specifically in a
Hmm.
specific spot. That would be where NKT would come in. So I've been teaching for NeuroKinetic Therapy since 2013, and I've been NKT certified since 2011,
Okay.
right? As far as the different levels, we have 3 levels, parts actually, rather than levels, but we call them levels. And it looks at imbalances between, like, let's say antagonists, for instance.
Okay.
Like, do we have somebody who is flexor dominant and they have trouble with their extensor compartment? Like, a great example of that would be somebody who bench presses way more than they can row, right?
Hmm.
And do we have a problem with balance on either side of the joint? Is there a
Okay.
problem within a system that's being affected? So we look at things analytically and we do it through a muscle testing protocol. So we look and see not how strong a muscle test is. That's more of like what we do in PT and chiropractic and
Okay.
neurology. To grade someone 0 out of 5 is called Kendall and Kendall muscle grading testing. That's not what we do in NKT. We're looking to see how someone executes a predicted outcome of a test. Like,
Hmm.
for instance, how does the lat react? Do they have to roll the shoulder forward? Do they have to shrug? Do they have
Hmm.
to hike on one side versus the other? How is it different? And does the person have resting tone? Do they just sit there with tightness? That's proprioceptive tension, right?
Hmm.
Or are they relatively relaxed if they're laying on my table in the middle of the afternoon, which is something they probably don't do on a regular basis. So
Okay.
why are they holding this unnecessary tension? Well, we do that when we have a stability motor control problem because we have to. We don't
Mm.
trust that relaxing the tissue will keep the person safe. I liken it to putting a parking brake on a car. Like,
Okay.
why do you do that if your car has automatic brake system? Why do you put the parking brake on? You do it just in case the parking brake, the
Mm.
automatic brake system fails. And not everybody does that. I certainly do that. I live in Colorado, so everything's got an incline. So
Right.
I'm going to put it on. So if the body predicts that there may be an issue, it'll put on its own parking brakes. Those
Mm.
proprioceptive parking brakes are usually due to joint decentration, where the joint's not centered properly. So all the muscles around it that help it center, that cross one joint, namely, will start to tighten. And in
Mm.
AKT, we look for the tightest thing associated with their complaint. And we use muscle testing to see how they do the predicted outcome.
Gotcha.
It's a very different way of looking at things than most people are used to. So at first, there's this like, whoa, I haven't looked that closely.
Right. Yeah.
And my boss, David Weinstock, calls it soft focus. Like you're feeling the muscle test, but you're looking everywhere else to see how the person executes the test.
Mm.
And helpful.
Is this an eyeball test like that you're doing, or is there more to it from there?
Eyeball test.
Are you just looking at it and kind of just
Oh,
seeing it? Is there
soft focus would be,
yeah,
yeah. But the muscle test is as much of a sensory test as it is a motor output test,
gotcha. Okay.
right? I think that's what people forget is that they have muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs. Those are sensory. Those are mechanoreceptive. So
Hmm.
it's proprioceptive. So if I push on somebody and they push back at me, like they had to feel me pushing them down, which is a
Okay.
spindle GTO action that sends information through the back of your spinal cord up to this major relay center, the bouncer of your club called the thalamus, right? The club being the cerebrum.
Mhm.
We have this whole kind of pathway that's sensory, and then you have a motor output. Then the person within milliseconds resists you.
Mm.
And it happens so quickly that we think it's a motor test, but it's a sensory test.
It's
So
interesting. I'm
yeah.
curious about it because I'm always interested in assessments that people can't cheat.
Hmm.
Where it's like even the FMS with stuff like I've talked about this, like if you're relatively strong, you can kind of cheat certain positions
Yes.
in there. That's why like chop and lift might not be if you're an athlete or so, you can make it look really good.
Mhm.
Like gymnasts are professional compensators. Like they
True.
make all their issues look really good on camera.
This
And
is this is an important point. Compensation is not bad.
okay.
Okay. Poor compensation can result in joint decentration, overload principle, the basic Moss things
Mhm.
of mobility, overload, strength, and stability. Like those are the things that make somebody injured. Like one of those, or if not all four of those, can create an injury cycle for someone, right? So it's I used to work for a gymnastics team, so I love that you brought that up. And you're right. Like all athletes are amazing compensators. Like look at like you watch any major sports team, they're not all moving the same.
Yeah.
They're all creating their own way of doing it. That doesn't make them, they're good compensators, but they're not necessarily poor compensators. So poor
Mm.
compensatory strategy is what we look for in NKT, what we look for in SFMA and FMS. We're looking to quiet some of the cheats that may lead to the reason why we're trying to fix the issue. Like if somebody has back pain on extension of their overhead serve in tennis and they're jamming their facets together, and then I see them jamming their facets together while they're doing core strategies or overhead reaches on military press. What
Mhm.
am I going to do? I'm telling them to tuck their ribs down. And they're like, well,
Right.
I can't. And still create this strategy. That's a poor compensatory strategy because it creates pain, tightness, discomfort. That compensation strategy has graduated to poor compensatory strategy. So my job as a rehab specialist is not to fix everyone's compensations. I'm not going to take a pro baseball player with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball and decrease his external rotation because
Right.
that
Okay.
looks dysfunctional on his throwing arm versus his non-throwing arm, right? Oh, let's just fix that. Do you know how mad that person would get if I tried to make them even?
Yeah.
Like they would lose their ability to do their sport in the way that they want to do it. That is not necessarily poor compensatory strategy. But if that same person is taught to throw in a way that tightens them and they create a strategy around it to get away from the tightness, and all of a sudden they're cranking through their elbow and now need to have Tommy Johns because I didn't tell them that they had a shoulder strategy issue and that tightness, it was a poor
Mhm.
compensatory strategy. That's when the issue becomes a major issue. And poor compensatory strategies, you know what they always show up with? They always show up with tightness.
Yeah.
The pitcher will tell me I can't get my arm loose. And
Mm.
I'm like, that's something I have now permission to go into.
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
can't just look at range of motion and say, oh, well, you need to be fixed because that's compensation. No,
Right.
it's not compensation that's I need to fix unless it's poor compensation.
That's real. I've never heard that distinction before. I've always kind of just looped compensation into a bucket of bad and like we need to do. And obviously, as you just explained it there, yeah, if you have a specific, mode, I think what is it like a tennis player? It's like they have like 30%, bigger, arm on the one side versus the other. Well, yeah,
Yes.
they're playing with one arm from there.
It doesn't
And
mean it's poor. It
mhm,
doesn't mean it's poor until there's
that's what I
pain,
was
the
going to ask. When does it
tightness,
turn into poor? Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And my job is not to make someone perfect. One of the most important things I learned from Gray early in my career, Gray Cook, was that the perfect score in the FMS is not a 21. The ideal score in the FMS is over 14,
Mhm.
where you have general symmetry. And that's what I promote to my patients. I want you to have general symmetry, not perfect symmetry. So you can compensate, right? You clearly are compensating if you have not a 21,
Right.
right? But it's more about trying to make your body work for you in your sport, in your life. Come on, we have a hand in this. Very few people are ambidextrous, truly ambidextrous.
Mhm.
So we may always have that kind of right arm, left leg dominance. It doesn't mean that it's bad for you until it's bad for you. And then we need to build more general symmetry. So once that FMS falls below 14, that's when things start to become problematic, when things get overly tight or lose their range of motion, or there's excessive range that
Mhm.
creates pain or tightness. For me, tightness is key. A perception of tightness by the patient and a perception of tightness by me, because it's both objective and subjective. It's the
Right.
one thing I've got. It's the only thing I've got. I've got range of motion tests, but that might mean nothing if the person's not tight, right? So in NKT, I think was the first NKT and Gray at FMS. They were the first ones to me that pointed out to me that range of motion isn't everything. It's a
Mhm.
thing. It's a thing, and it should be appreciated. But it was merging my SFMA, FMS with NKT. NKT made me understand what poor compensatory strategy was. When someone has a ton of resting tone, why do they have that? It's because they don't feel safe. They feel like they have
Mhm.
to decelerate, like that parking brake. And so I
Yeah.
started looking at compensation much differently after that. And so for the last 11, 12 years of my career, I've been combining, DNS, SFMA, FMS, and now with NKT. And like there may be place for the foam roller, but it may need to be a little tiny bit. It's usually
Yeah.
like a minute of
Right.
what I'm
Right. Yeah.
suggesting, rather than the 45 minutes they're doing before they even start training. Like, how do you even find the time to foam roll for 45
Well,
minutes?
after that, you're just pretty much laying on the couch watching a show on your phone, from there.
Which, why can't you do that while you're watching Netflix
Exactly.
or like at the gym? Make that the time where you're really focusing on your poor compensatory strategy. And so that might mean a minute on the foam roller followed by, strategizing not needing to use the overactive part. So in NKT, we're always looking at overactive versus underactive parts in a poor compensatory strategy. We're not trying to fix all of your stuff. We're not
Yeah.
trying to make you a perfect symmetrical being. Let's face it, you're never going to be perfectly symmetrical. Your diaphragm is
Right.
bigger on one side than the other. You have a liver,
Right.
like on right, and you don't have on the left. So you're never going to be perfectly symmetrical, but we can make you generally symmetrical. And that is something I really learned from Gray, just to give him an
Mhm.
infinite shout out that, Kathy, you don't have to make your patients perfect. You have to help them with general symmetry.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful statement to go over and over again on because I've thought of this too, and I've had conversations about this with technique even of movement. And some people are always trying to find that perfect technique. It's like, no, it just needs to be safe and have a standard of movement down. It doesn't need to be perfect. You can always chase that forever. But I saw so many people that I've worked with who felt afraid to do anything because they thought they were doing it wrong. They think there is a perfect way to do it and a wrong way. Everything else is wrong from there. And it just
Mhm.
leaves people in such inaction when it's like, no, as long as you know the standards, you're feeling safe. Do you feel okay with it? Good. Keep doing it over and over
Mhm.
again. And I think, as you just explained there, that compensation versus poor compensation is the biggest distinction. And the more you recognize that, then that's just so powerful right there. I think
If,
that's
if
huge.
if I ever have a patient, Mike, that doesn't believe me, that I'm okay with them having a little weirdness. What I do is I send them a video of Michael Johnson,
Mhm.
one of the best runners
Sprinter.
ever
Yep.
for the
Mhm.
United States. He had the world record for 30 years. I mean, that is a long time to hold a running record. Most of those records are broken within a few years, right?
Yep.
Just
Mhm.
people get faster, bigger, stronger, more capable because they they want to beat the previous
Mhm.
person, so they have someone to fight against. But Michael Johnson, no one touched him for 30 years because he ran upright.
Mhm.
He ran with a completely straight trunk and his legs were moving. It was the weirdest thing ever. Even in the 90s, when we were watching it, we were like, that is the weirdest thing ever. But how
Yeah.
do you argue with somebody who has held the record for 30 years? So most people probably try to change his run. He probably had so many people try, lean forward, you'll get more aerodynamic flow. Like you're fighting against your airflow. Like you're actually limiting your ability to use the trunk to create a falling mechanism. I'm sure that he had people pump that into him.
Right.
But how do you fight with someone who had the record for 30 years? No one could beat him because he was able to use his weirdness
Hmm.
to work for him in a way that no one could beat. So why are we trying to make everyone the same all the time?
Yeah.
Why are we trying to fit them into this prescribed box? I don't do that at all with my patients. I look to see, look, I don't want you to create unnecessary tensions in places. And one of my patients, he comes in and he's wonderful. He works on the get up for an hour, like for 45 minutes. And all we do is the get up because that's what he's really into. And I try to throw other things in there. He's like, I don't want to. I want to figure this out because I feel like this exercise gets me and I get it. And I want to continue to load it bottoms up regular. And I love this about him.
That's awesome.
So we watch his get up over and over, 45 minutes of get ups. And this is maybe like 20 visits in now. And watching him rehabilitate various parts of his body from shoulder to neck to hip and finding his body in the getup. And he often asks me, does this look perfect? Does this look good? I'm like, how does it feel?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
he's like, do you feel tightnesses anywhere? That's what we look at. Where do you feel unnecessary tensions growing? My job is not to make his getup look like Mark Chang's getup. No
Right.
one's getup looks like
Yeah.
Dr.
Sorry.
Mark Chang. He has the best getup. He will probably always have the best getup. And I'm not trying to compare him to Mark, nor would I send him Mark's video. What I do is I send my patient's videos.
Mhm.
And I'm like, you'll hear me coaching on there. Like, look at what you're doing here. Look what cue really works
Mhm.
for you, what you're feeling. That's the feeling that you want. That, like you were talking about, that effortless, that freedom.
Yeah.
That is what we don't want these tensions, these like feeling like your body's going to rip apart or feeling like you need to get on the foam roller before you have permission to do something. That I think is where I think the fun lies in getting someone to accept that their body is perfect. We're just trying to get them to understand how their body works in those particular things that we're doing.
I love that. I think the title of this episode is Use Your Weirdness to Your Strength right there. I
Oh, how
absolutely love
very
that.
fitting since I'm the
Yeah.
weirdest
So,
chiropractor on the planet. So,
yeah. So,
like, yeah, my patients often describe me, they're like, I don't know how to describe Dooley. She is a doctorate in chiropractic. She has a master's in anatomy. Here you go. But like when you're in a session with her, she may not touch you,
yeah.
which is the truth. It may be very limited. I might feel for tightness, right? Or I might do a muscle test on
Mhm.
you. But most of the time, it's very weird to have a chiropractor that's not, and then,
Right.
that's very hands off. But I really do think that most of the majority of what someone is going to take home with them is the things they figure out for themselves with me present as someone that they trust.
Love it. Yeah. Um,
Weird.
Listen, Kathy, thank you so much for the time today. This time has flown by. I've
Oh,
learned so much from you. I've had so many notes down here. But I really appreciate taking the time today.
oh, I'm so privileged to be on your amazing podcast. And if anyone has any questions, if anything I said doesn't make sense or doesn't ring true, or if it irritates a part of your paradigm, just email me at drkathydooley@gmail.com and maybe I could just bring some clarity into the way that I think and maybe just open your mind to another viewpoint. Please feel free to argue with me. I love the debate. I'm a Libra, so.
Perfect. All right. So we get your email in the show notes. If people want to follow other stuff that you're doing, like socials, what's the best place that they can check you out?
Oh, sure. My social for Facebook is just my name. So it's me, high-fiving with my husband. I think we're arm wrestling, actually. So you won't be able to miss it. And he's 6'5" and I'm 5'4", so you'll be able to see the disparity. And then my social media for Instagram is Immaculate Dissection.
Mhm.
Ha ha ha. Very punny. And you're welcome. It says Dr. Kathy Dooley under
Yep.
it. So you'll see a painted torso and it looks anatomical. So you
Perfect.
can DM me there, or you can message me on Facebook, or you can email me.
Awesome. Dr. Kathy, again, thank you so much. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Go follow Kathy, and I will talk to you guys on the next one. All right, peace.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some great value here. And if you like this episode, please drop a comment and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It does more to build the show than you can imagine. And do not forget to check out and join the Strength Connection Facebook group. In this group, I share the biggest takeaways and lessons from these amazing conversations, as well as training and strength tips for pursuing mastery and fulfillment in life. This group is filled with individuals looking to take full control over their strength, and it's the perfect space to explore new ideas and to share your journey. You'll also get exclusive access to the Strength Connection Mastery Seminars. It's a deep dive into the physical, mental, and spiritual training that you can begin using immediately. So do not wait. Go now. Seriously, go. All right, much love to you. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.